Hello, everyone. This is Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Cash Forecasting, Understand the How and Why of AP, AR, and Market Dynamics. I'm excited to have with me one of my very favorite co-speakers, John Paquette. He's the Vice President of Solutions in the U.S. for TIS. John, welcome to the webinar, and give us a little bit about your background before I dive in here, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. Happy to be here as always. So as Ernie mentioned, I'm John Paquette. I oversee the solutions team for TIS's US market. Joined TIS back in 2019, but really all my background is as a treasury practitioner directly prior to that. So I have about 15 years experience managing treasury within US organizations before making the jump over to the software side. So happy to be here today, Ernie. Looking forward to the webinar.
Right. Thanks, John. Uh, Also want to welcome my webinar partner today, TIS. They share my commitment to thought leadership. They've been a key partner of mine for several years, but more importantly, they share my commitment to impacting the career success of Treasury and finance professionals. So always happy to have them as a partner of mine. A few housekeeping items for the webinar today. If you'd like a certificate of attendance for today's webinar to submit for CTP, FP&A, or CPA credits, you'll have to answer all the polling questions, remain on for the duration of the webinar, and answer the short survey at the end of the webinar today. If you want a copy of the presentation or want to make sure that I know you want a certificate of attendance, please send an email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Again, that's Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Let's give us a little roadmap for our discussion today. John and I are going to have a little bit more of a conversation rather than just all of us going back and forth on the slides. So we're going to start things off with what I call your cash IQ of what happened. That's really where we've been focused in Treasury in my mind, except for the last 10 years, but especially for the past really 3, 4, maybe even 5 years if we're going back to where it all started, when we really seen a lot of automation in AI, really get into the realm of cash forecasting, and then we'll talk about your cash IQ and understanding why it happened. So really understanding why it happened, in my mind, really gets us to really understanding accounts payable and accounts receivable, but also all of our intercompany movements and capital spending and all of those things. Then we'll dive in with some cash forecasting, tee things up with some benchmarks and some research I've partnered with on TIS. And then we'll get into John's part. He'll talk about cash forecasting, really get into how it's done at a high level. And then John will share with us 10 tips to improve cash forecasting. And then we'll dive really deeper into technology, really how leading solutions are empowering folks to really deliver predictability, more predictability into AP and AR, and make data-driven decisions on their cash movements. And then I'll come back in and talk about the ROI of cash forecasting accuracy, which is not often shared. So obviously that's part of the business case. So love to provide you guys a little bit of framework on that when you're looking to invest in your cash forecasting. But of course, cash is king. One thing I wanted to share, which still is always great to see some research. Got one result here from the 2023 Treasury Perspective Survey for my friend Strategic Treasurer. I have the link there. It's a great read. I wanted to share this. Craig and his team asked the respondents, considering all of your operations, which 3 areas do you spend the most time working on? He's got a really good data here, over 5 different years as data points. So we can see cash forecasting, right? 60% of companies identified that in 2023. So that's incredibly insightful. So to me, I just wanted to point out that cash is king there. And another thing is, as we still see, the importance of cash positioning and reporting, but then what I would like to see a little bit more, which kind of disappoints me a little bit, is payment management. And so I think in Treasury, I haven't seen enough attention being paid to data-driven decisions around the types of payments that are made and the timing. So I'd like to see that number a little bit higher there. And we'd like to see the reconciliations and accounting number a lot lower. So that's just my observations. John, anything stick out to you here at all?
No, I think it definitely aligns with what we're seeing in the market today is that cash forecasting, particularly around the pandemic years, just shot up in importance for organizations as they're trying to find ways to deal with that unpredictability in their forecast, get better insights into what was happening with the business. And it's just persisted and even, increased going into 2023 with economic uncertainty, rising interest costs and things like that, right? So you can see it's really a top of mind thing for treasury practitioners today.
Right. Just to kind of dovetail on John's point. So we're great to see that it has the attention, but what we'd like to see is it not trying to, I don't think we need to spend the majority of our time in treasury and cash forecasting, especially with some of the tools that we'll talk about today. So I'd like to see that attention to cash forecasting stay up, but I'd like us to see spending more time. In my mind, from what I've seen, a lot of cash forecasting, the time that's being spent is not spent on strategic activity analysis, variance analysis. It's still spent on data manipulation, and what I would consider non-value add activity. So that's what we're here to educate you about today. Cash forecasting got your attention. So how do we get more value out of our cash forecasting efforts? And so again, like as I mentioned, your cash IQ, right? We want to know what happened. So just some research of mine, just to get you thinking. But what we still see as there are still quite a few companies that don't have visibility, the daily bank account visibility, which would be ideal. There obviously are limits to that, but given the technology that we've seen, especially over the past couple years, you see so many webinars about bank connectivity, and TIS is an absolute leader in this space. So I think that technological barrier has really gone down. So if I was a treasury manager, I would be asking why don't we have that visibility? As always, we can say you can't manage what you can't see. John, I want you to kind of jump in here. What have you seen as far as the technical capabilities? What about the ability of bank communications? How would you comment on how much that's transformed the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's become a lot more simple for organizations to access their bank
Yeah,
connectivity directly. There's more fully managed solutions out there. The protocols are better understood. There's better pre-built architecture that companies can
yeah,
leverage to be able to pull in bank reports automatically and things like that, right? So, and super important. I mean, as you pointed out, bank account visibility, cash visibility is foundational to so much in treasury management, whether it just be pure cash management or just decreasing the risk profile for your company as well. If you have full visibility into your bank accounts, you can more proactively determine if something strange is going on in one of those accounts versus if you're needing to pull e-banking reports and things like that to really get full visibility into all your accounts. And still a pretty high percentage there, under 75%
yeah,
visibility, almost 40%, right? So still
yeah.
seems like work to be done here.
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the things that I've seen is banks have been nudged pretty hard to invest more, right? But I think technology, I think companies really, the TIS is really one of the first companies that I saw that really took on that arduous task of managing the formats, understanding the formats, facilitating better communications. And I think other solutions have followed. And that's really made the banks, right, be more cooperative in APIs and so forth. So that's been incredible. That's been really transformational to me in the treasury function. So kind of understanding what happened, right? I like to keep it simple. And so, what you want to see is where are we at in this understanding, and where do we want to go? How do we get there, right? So you have to look at things. Oh, what information can you see? Can you see balance? Can you see details? When can you see it? As John mentioned, is it a day late, 2 days late, 3 days late? When do we need to see it to make decisions? And what can you do with it, right? Are we getting the right information to the right people? So this information might be sitting there, but the treasury manager really needs this. He needs to do the hedging activity, FX transactions, and then important to get with your team and dig in. What do you want, right, and need to do with it? So, what are the barriers to not having that information? What's the value to having that information more quickly and getting that information maybe in a better format to the right people? So one of the things we want to do, right, we want to be able to understand what happened. We have to be able to do both, right? Understand what happened, visibility, and then we can understand why it happened. Then we can get that predictability and control and optimize those cash inflows and outflows. So just some more data. Interesting question that we've asked every year for the past few years. I partnered with a survey on TIS asking for the desired technology impacts, and I just like to highlight gain better visibility into key data to drive better decision making. That's what I'm getting at here. Can't manage what you can't see. Also important to note, improve the systems, right, in order to support recent growth. And again, to me, unlocking the value of information right? We need to have visibility into that information so we can make those data-driven decisions. So just kind of interesting on that front. So let's start to get into why it happened. So I'm going to get into my little AP and AR spiel that I always give. Really incentivize treasury professionals to really understand why cash is coming in and going out. So big key of that is visibility into accounts payable. So I strongly encourage my treasury friends to really dive deep into accounts payable, understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, work with them to facilitate visibility into their processes, see if we can remove non-value add activities, see if we can give them more time in order to improve our supplier relationships. At the end of the day, what we'd like to do is we'd like to optimize the types of payments that we make, right? So do we need checks? Can we do ACHs, other transactions? Are there ways for us to collaborate with our suppliers in terms of ghost cards, virtual cards that's mutually beneficial? But when you're really trying, and then also, is there the efficiency that allows us to take discounts that are available? So we need to understand the visibility of the process. And so you might go to accounts payable and say, hey, maybe you get visibility, and then we're not taking these discounts. And then they're like, well, we really can't because we have all these inherent barriers. Maybe we can't get our payments authorized. Maybe that it's caught in, capture code send, oh, verify and approve. So we can really look at those processes. So this is more of a slide for you to maybe take a look at, think at. If you're not an AP, go over to your team and just say, oh, I was on this webinar. Do we have any bottlenecks here? But we want to have visibility into the process and collaborate with our accounts payable team to take as much control of payment types and timing as possible. So we need to invest in understanding that, because that understanding is going to ultimately deliver us predictability into those payments. And one of the things we need to do is look at, okay, visibility. Why are we doing certain things? Why are we paying customers a certain way? Is it business as usual? Is it data-driven decisions? Why are we doing that? And are we just doing a check run every week? Are we doing a wire run every week? Why are we doing that, right? What's the reasons? There may be a reason to say we might want to continue doing that, but with the technology we have, we should be making data-driven decisions on how and when we make those payments, and just what visibility means into the people. If you're not haven't taken that deep dive yet, you have procurement. It all starts. I got to identify and vet suppliers. They're often involved in negotiating contracts. We have our AP folks, right? And then it starts with them: supplier onboarding, supplier information, relationship management, and then we have the people outside of AP, which often includes us treasury professionals, and we have multiple levels of approvers. We got PO approvers, supplier approvers, payment approvers, and all these people are involved. So we want to make sure that we're collaborating with our accounts payable friends to make sure that we are not holding up, right? Our colleagues aren't. Are we having bottlenecks? Are we having approval issues? Do we need to provide more backup information? For me, I really didn't have any access to backup information to approve payments unless I walked over to accounts payable and had them dig through a bunch of files, but now that's no longer necessary. So all those things are important, so we understand what makes accounts payable more efficient, better supplier relationship, more control over those. And then just kind of some interesting research, as I said, talked about. To me, we need to pay more attention to why we pay suppliers. And I've asked this question in the last probably 4 years, and I keep getting at the top 30% is processing costs. So that's good reason, but I thought that'd be higher. Preference of your customers, I think that's a good reason. But we have an awful lot of, we just do it the way we want to. Business as usual, convenience for AP staff. For me, in my mind, that as a treasury manager, I would like to collaborate with my suppliers and make sure we get a check. Okay, why are we doing checks? Is there a reason? Can we at least get you off check to ACH? Maybe they're a little bit more advanced. We can show them it's so basically this is a good sell to your suppliers. Is AP on my side effectively is AR improved on your side, so we can help them make educated decisions. We don't want to force all of our suppliers to take ghost cards or virtual cards or take a big haircut, because that's going to damage it's going to damage your relationships. A little bit more data there. Ask folks if they collaborate with suppliers relative to how they pay them. And then, excuse me, 34%. This is what I'd like to see if they ask and they work with them and then communicate with them and let them choose. I would make that a collaborative decision. But again, in looking back at my treasury career, which was, a while ago, I look at this as a big missed opportunity for me to add value and collaborate with accounts payable. John, what was your experience? Did you collaborate with your AP team on the way that payments were made, or what were you guys doing?
Yeah, we definitely did. I mean, I had the benefit of having AP actually report into me in
Oh,
Treasury,
okay,
so things quite a bit
awesome.
with the
Yeah,
collaboration. But I know exactly what you mean in terms of, sometimes AP is just stuck in that cycle of just producing, processing high volumes of transactions, invoices, payments on a day-over-day basis. They might not be thinking strategically about how those, payments are actually made, how they impact working capital, and some other
yeah,
opportunities might be out there for how to make those payments in terms of leveraging virtual card programs or
yeah,
things like supply chain finance facilities and things like that to kind of introduce almost a strategic aspect into the
yeah,
AP product. But that definitely exists today, and that's definitely a key area where Treasury could collaborate more with
yeah.
AP, kind of drive more strategic value into that process. So couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just to dovetail, kind of, I always get on my soapbox. In my ideal world, AP and A, I report up to Treasury. If that's not the case, then what we want to do is maximize the influence that we have. So I have survey results I'm not showing on this webinar about the relationships. What does Treasury have control over, right? And payables. And to my mind, we want to maximize that. And if we don't have direct control, maybe it's indirect control, but we want to make sure we have as much control as possible over that. So let's flip the script a little bit on accounts receivable. Again, talk about visibility into the process. Again, if you haven't really been in the weeds, maybe you're in treasury, but you never really have had to dive in. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of processes. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of opportunities for, uh, I would say, for bottlenecks. And then there's issues in being, managing our supplier relationship. So first, we got to start out with credit, sales fulfillment, invoicing, cash app, collections, deductions. A big pain point for me in Treasury was always just cash application. So it might be the case that you would hold orders uh, for one by the customer level, maybe by the currency level, maybe by the industry level, because cash hasn't been applied. We certainly don't want to do that. And we certainly need visibility into the collections and how we're managing those communications, each and every communication with a customer matters. And then obviously we want to make sure those deductions, if they're being taken as they should be, and we don't have our people on the phone hours and hours a day. Doing that, the visibility allows us to identify bottlenecks, but also trends and areas that help us ask the right questions. So that visibility helps us ask the right questions. Not only do we deliver predictability into our accounts receivable, we can facilitate the faster collection and application of cash in our company as well. So just kind of look at the process a little bit deeper, look at the visibility into people, right? Which people are involved at which stages. You look at their credit limits, managing, revising, credit analyst, credit manager, risk leader, treasurer, CFO, all those people can be involved. Your reporting and metrics, again, credit and AR. And then once again, we have approvers, right, on certain things going all across the office of the CFO. So what we need to do is we want to help remove friction, uh, friction in being a customer with us or friction in being a supplier with us. We want to optimize those relationships. And I just want to real quickly, this is one of my favorite diagrams, courtesy of our friends at TIS, but this is something I would print out, right, and have up, but this really gives you, right, I think they talk about visibility and optimization, right, the inbound cash and the outbound payments, and we look at some of the enablers, right, all the different places, and what I like to say is the vision and strategy, right? So we can be much more strategic in types and timing, but also making sure. So we want to make payments as efficiently as possible with the necessary risk controls in place, but also on the collections side as well. So I think this is one of the best diagrams that I've seen. And if I was doing like training or CTP training, this is certainly something that I would really rely on. So let me go ahead and give you guys a break and let you hear who you're here to hear from is John. So I'm going to go ahead and pass forward to John. He's going to drive us through some of our benchmarks and research. John, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, thanks very much, Ernie. Yeah, just a few more data points here from the recent research study we did with Ernie here in terms of the purpose of why organizations are doing cash forecasting. And I think this definitely aligns with what we're seeing in the market. It seems like most companies are focused on using their forecast for the immediate, sort of short-term cash management type purposes, right? Especially now when people are looking to minimize interest expense or maximize returns on idle cash. So I think you're seeing some of that here, where things like dividend planning and board reporting are pretty low in terms of percentages here, and things like managing your short-term borrowings and really sort of how you're managing cash and liquidity on a day-over-day basis are much higher priority. Definitely we see organizations go the other way as well, but predominantly we're seeing the focus on the short term. And you can really see this, I think, in this next result here in terms of the frequency of cash forecasting. You have something like 2/3 of organizations here forecasting weekly or more frequently, right? So those that are forecasting monthly or quarterly is only about 1/3 of the total results. And for organizations really focus more on longer range liquidity planning and things like that, maybe that's sufficient. But if you're really looking to actively manage your cash and really maximize returns on idle cash, you're going to need to do that at least weekly, if not daily. I think this graph is definitely shifting towards the left too. We're hearing more and more companies want to forecast more frequently than weekly as well, and almost get into that real-time cash management as well. And I think some of the impediments to that today are the complexity of creating forecasts for companies, the amount of work that goes into aggregating that data, which kind of echoes back to that first slide we looked at in terms of the amount of time organizations are spending today on cash forecasting, which is quite a bit, right? And hopefully they're spending more time on analyzing that forecast on a go-forward basis. Moving to the next slide here, we have some other results here in terms of the accuracy overall of the forecast, which I was pretty impressed at, to be honest with you. So it seems like 50% of organizations we kind of pulled in this survey here were generating better than 90% accuracy, which is really good for cash forecasting. Obviously you're taking data, you're applying assumptions to that to sort of derive an impression of what cash flow might be. And to generate results that are greater than 90% is actually very good. And 15% are actually getting over 95%, which is awesome as well. Only about 12% generating less than 85% accuracy on their forecast based on this these research results here. But some of that might be based on this next graph we have here to the right, which is the cash forecast time horizon. And about, it looks like, what, 72% or so are forecasting less than 1 month out. Obviously, if you're forecasting a short duration like that, it's a lot easier to be accurate. If you're using the right inputs to forecast cash, you probably have a pretty good idea of what your cash flow is going to be, and you might just be dealing with some abnormalities or timing adjustments and things like that. So, and yeah, I was a bit surprised to see that there's only about less than 30% that are forecasting longer than 2 months out. I don't know, Ernie, if that kind of surprised you as well to see the duration of the cash forecast time horizon here results. But
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, it aligns with what I saw. What was surprising to me earlier was the purposes of the cash forecast. So as I was going through the survey results, I was kind of looking at them, just kind of going all the way down, and I was like, that seems a little bit off. But then when I looked at the purposes, right, of the forecast, and I think, yeah, I think there's a little bit disconnect on the cash forecast time horizon as well. But to me, it kind of speaks to, you have to look at, when you're looking at the value of the cash forecast, you have to look at what you're actually using it for, what's the data-driven decision making. And so at some point, you reach this level of accuracy, which you want to optimize your technology, and then you're like, okay, if I can increase it by this much more, right? What is the value to my company? What is the ROI? But all these things are interrelated. So I think that's really what I take out of there. So I'll let you, John, really kind of get into the how of cash forecasting at a high level. This is from a recent white paper that TIS released. It's got a really, really good content in there. So I encourage you guys to look at the white paper as well.
yeah, sure. This gets into a little bit of just about the typical process most organizations go to when they're building their cash forecast. So obviously, step one here is the data collection aggregation, really figuring out what you want to forecast and then assigning a data source to it that you can use to kind of reliably predict that cash flow. This, like I had mentioned before, is really the biggest impediment for most organizations in creating their forecasts. We've seen other survey results where upwards of 75% of companies that responded said that the data collection, the data aggregation, and really the normalization of that data to be able to get it into a forecast tool is the reason that's why it takes so long to create the forecast, or it's actually a barrier to creating the forecast more frequently. So this is something we definitely look to solve for immediately when we engage with a new client. But obviously a really important step in the process here in terms of sort of foundationally building up that forecast. And then you have the stakeholder communications, which is, I think, really dovetails nicely into a lot of what Ernie was saying earlier about collaboration with the AP, AR, accounting, and FP&A departments. So the data is one thing, but to get the sort of qualitative feedback about that data, make sure that you're sort of using the right assumptions and things like that, and that you're considering things that maybe only the business owners themselves would know in your forecast is definitely important. So we definitely encourage the collaboration between departments, both in the initial creation of the forecast, and then on a go-forward basis as well in the analysis and the variance analysis of the forecast, which we'll talk about in a little bit more in some of the later slides here. And then the cash flow projection itself. So obviously you're taking your data and you're applying some assumptions on top of it to derive an impression of what your cash flow is going to be, and that's going to be sort of the initial output here. What your company is looking to generate for a cash flow forecast. Usually there's some refinement done there, and there's some of these additional steps we'll get into on the next slide here. But your cash projection, once you have that built, is a great tool. Just even if it's not perfect, as soon as you can start visualizing those cash flows within your business, you start learning more about the business. Now cash moves in and out. You're in a better position for cash management, and in a better position as well to sort of further refine that forecast on a go-forward basis. And we have a few more steps here, but I think, yeah, we're going to sort of jump in here with a polling
Yeah.
question before we dive into the next few points. Just in terms of, just a question out to the audience. We understand the reasons for our forecast variances. So if everybody on the line wouldn't mind responding to the survey, maybe we'll have a quick chat too about the results here.
All right, thanks, John. Also want to remind everyone, if you're interested in receiving a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all our polling questions, as John mentioned. We really appreciate it. If everyone is intently listening, just go ahead and click the button. It'll only take a second. And then, like I said, John mentioned, we'll go ahead and share the poll results, give us a little color commentary, and then John will take us through the other steps, and the few things he'll be talking about next. He'll be talking about scenario analysis, and he touched on variance analysis. He'll be digging a little bit deeper there as well. So I'm going to give you guys another few seconds or so. I know there's a lag sometimes when you press the button. All right, let's go ahead, close the poll. Let's go ahead and take a quick peek. For me, excited to see that such a high number agree or strongly agree. So that's 81%. So that's really incredible. So obviously that's a key factor in really minimizing that variance, is understanding it, right? What's the root causes? Is there things that you can do about that? But until you have your basis, until you understand your variances, you really can't get into that any mode of continuous improvement. John, what are you thinking here about the results?
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I think that's what upwards of 80% here that either
Yeah.
agree that they understand their forecast variances, which is key. I mean, that's understanding those variances is almost important as forecasting itself. It's a key insight, key takeaway, and there's a lot you can do with that forecast variance analysis as well, which we're going to talk about on the next couple slides here. So that's definitely a positive result. Yeah, just picking up the fourth point here, sort of from the previous slide, scenario analysis. Once you have that forecast created and you're generating some sort of a cash projection, you're probably going to want to run a couple different scenarios, maybe a pessimistic scenario, an optimistic scenario, or if you're planning for certain events, maybe you work in a scenario pertaining to that. This is going to be driven a lot by what you have for tools at your disposal. So, if you're using Excel to forecast, there's probably not a ton you can do for a sophisticated scenario analysis. Maybe things like decreasing by a certain percentage or something like that. Whereas if you're using an actual software application, they can help you build really sophisticated scenario analysis based on things like analysis of historical patterns and things like that, right? Comparison to the forecast inputs that you're using. But definitely important to do a couple different cuts of the forecast to kind of understand what could be and plan for those scenarios appropriately. 5, variance analysis ties directly into the survey results we just looked at here. So sounds like a lot of companies on the line here today have good experience with variance analysis. And to me, there's kind of like 2 things you're looking to do if you have the variance analysis really squared away. One is to understand really what the purpose is. So it could be that the variances are driven by forecasting error, right? Maybe your assumptions are wrong, or you're using the wrong data to project out a particular cash flow, which is obviously something you want to pick up on and correct. But it could also be that variances are caused by business performance as well, right? Maybe you're using a projected revenue number to forecast cash inflows, and the business is off on performance in terms of achieving that revenue target. Or maybe you're forecasting based on a certain assumption around like DSO, your days sales outstanding. You're assuming it's going to be 35 days, ends up being 41 days, and so you have 6 days of cash that essentially is delayed on your side, right? So it could be business performance issues as well. And then once you understand that, you can kind of address it appropriately, because a lot of those variances, if they are driven by business performance, you can then go to the AR department, like we had mentioned, to be a business partner and say, hey, DSO slipped 6 days last month and impacted cash in XYZ way, and try to work collectively to figure out how you might be able to correct that on a go-forward basis. Maybe there are certain problematic payers, customers, you can work with them directly, right, to actually improve cash flow on a go-forward basis, rather than just understanding the reason for why the variance actually existed, right? So 6 is reporting and monitoring. So obviously the cash flow is a report in and of itself, but there's also a lot of sort of supplementary reports that a lot of companies like to use alongside that. One of the most common, I'd say, is working capital metrics, and one that we definitely encourage. I brought up a lot, the impacts of things like DSO, DPO, and different working capital metrics, what they're going to have on your actual cash flow projection. And so being able to track those month over month is sort of an important complement to the cash flow forecast. So if you see a DPO that's decreasing rapidly or a DSO that's increasing rapidly, you can kind of get ahead of that before you start to feel the pain on the cash flow side, right? So that's definitely a good one to have as well. As well as sort of keeping an eye on vendor payment delays and things like that. So say for example in your variance analysis, you're doing very favorably in one particular week on the accounts payable, and you say, hey, that's great. We ended cash in a better position than we thought we we're going to be. But then maybe 2 weeks from now, that AP lag is going to catch up and all that cash is going to evaporate, right? So understanding kind of those outstanding AP balances and also partnering with the departments is important to kind of make sure you have the full picture when you're doing that variance analysis too. And then 7 is just sort of indicating that the forecast process, obviously it's continuously improved over time. So there's adaptions, there's improvements. Forecast methodologies can always get better. Technology is always improving as well, right? AI and machine learning are playing a much bigger role for organizations who have technology solutions in creating their forecasts today. And then also businesses just change. So, some of the metrics or the sources that you use for forecast data might change over time. You might expand into new business lines. You might do acquisitions, divestitures, whatever it might be. And then just sort of keeping an eye on how those impact your overall cash flow forecast is sort of an important step too. So. And then this slide here just sort of summarizes the results. Clearly understand your current and intended purposes for your cash forecast. That's an important one. I think Ernie and I have mentioned it a couple times here. Is it short-term cash management? Is it to maximize return on idle cash, limit interest expense, those types of things, and really making sure that you have the right inputs to really be able to derive the cash flow forecast you want for those purposes? Or are you looking more towards long-range objectives and things like that? Yeah, I think the other one, maybe understand your data sources. And we always recommend for organizations to get as granular with the data sources as you can. So, for example, if you're forecasting your receipts from your customers, try to do that based on the actual AR invoices, right? Which are going to know the amounts that are going to come in at the customer level. They're going to know your specific payment terms with that particular customer to be able to really accurately derive cash at a very, very, very detailed level. And that's not only going to drive a lot of accuracy in your cash flow forecast, but it's also going to take that variance analysis to the next level, where if you do have variances in your cash flow forecast, you'll be able to actually pinpoint those down to specific customers or groups of customers, and then partner with the business to actually solve those challenges, right? Rather than just recognize that a variance really sort of emerged within the forecast itself. Let your objectives and data drive your process, not the technology or statistical methods of forecasting. That's important too, right? Really pick a solution that's suitable for what you're looking to do with your forecasting process, not just sort of get distracted by emerging technologies and things like that. That's always good words of wisdom here. Every business is different a little bit, right, in terms of how they're going to forecast cash, what they're going to use for drivers of that forecast, and make sure that tool is really suitable to overall what you how you kind of build that forecast process. And then, yeah, just the sort of the community effect here in terms of identifying professional colleagues who face the same challenges. That's obviously a great way to be able to, refine your forecast overall, just from experience from other individuals who are in the same industry as you, facing the same challenges as you, using the same software as you even, right? Just sort of finding that community and understanding what best practices are and what other companies have had success with. This brings us into our 10 tips for better forecasting here. So, first of all, here we're starting off with number one, establish a standardized and well-documented process. This is definitely important because, if you think about a global organization forecasting cash, you want to make sure they're doing that on a consistent methodology. You don't want one business unit to be forecasting cash based on, say, historical averages, and another using a methodology based on revenue and expense with DSO and DPO metrics applied to be able to drive cash that way. Because when you go to roll that forecast up from a corporate perspective, it's just those two methodologies aren't going to mix and match very well. And it's going to create a lot of cloudiness in that forecast, both in terms of building it, the levels of accuracy that different business lines are having, and then overall that variance analysis. So that's definitely a good tip to keep in mind here. Drive collaboration with both internal and external stakeholders is one that we've hit quite a few times here. So the business owners themselves, the process owners, are going to have a much deeper level of understanding about the data than somebody who's kind of looking at that data at the very, very surface level. So important to collaborate with those stakeholders, both in the creation of the forecast, but even on a go-forward basis, and as part of your variance analysis process or ongoing sort of cash management type conversations. Those relationships are critical. I think that really came out a lot during the pandemic, as really Treasury couldn't necessarily rely on the data solely to be able to forecast cash for certain criteria. Like, say, for example, your customer receipts. If you were projecting that out based on the AR balances and some sort of standardized DSO metric, everybody knows that kind of went out of whack during the pandemic, where customer payments slowed way, way, way down. And you saw Treasury collaborating a lot more with AR directly to say, hey, what's happening here? You guys having conversations with these payers? When's XYZ going to pay? That's a big receipt for us, right? So, and a lot of that is carried forward as people kind of have recognized the value of that communication within the forecasting process. And then 3 kind of ties into that: educate the stakeholders on the relevant forecast processes, KPIs, and outputs. People might not be totally aware of how their day-to-day business activities actually impact cash flow. And so doing some level of education on that is typically pretty valuable. For example, I keep bringing up the example of the creeping DSO, the DSO creeping from 35 days to somewhere in the low 40s, and the impact that has on cash, right? The AR department might not recognize that. They might just be viewing that metric as sort of something that they're trying to hit internally, but not recognizing the impact that it has on cash flow and Treasury's day-to-day cash management decisions. Likewise, AP might, maybe they're paying invoices, but there's a big vacation period coming up, so they decide to pay everything for the next 2 weeks in today's AP run, and Treasury all of a sudden has a shock to their cash forecast in terms of the disbursements. They have to draw on a line of credit or liquidate some investments or whatever it might be. People might not be aware of those real impacts to cash flow from their business activities. So definitely worth the time to educate those individuals too. Number 4, adopt a rolling forecast methodology. I think probably it seems like, the level of sophistication of the companies on the line for their forecasting probably knows what this means, right? So ending cash equals starting cash the next day, the next week, whatever it might be. Grouping your cash inflows and outflows by certain categories so it makes it easy to compare them day over day, week over week, right? This is just a good methodology to get into overall when you're tracking your cash flow forecast, and really understanding how 1 week rolls to the next, how items that didn't, kind of come to fruition in a current week roll into the next, and what methodology you use to kind of apply those on a go-forward basis. Just a great way to kind of look at the forecast and kind of industry best practice. And then understand the impacts of both direct and indirect cash flow drivers. I think most companies these days probably pick one of the 2 methodologies to start with. And I'd say most we see these days probably manage their short-term cash forecast based on a direct method. That's primarily because you have really good forecast input sources to be able to use for that purpose in the short term. To be able to use a direct method, you can create a really granular forecast, a pretty highly accurate forecast, and one that kind of suits well to a nice variance analysis. But we also see a mix and match of methodologies as well, where, obviously the inputs that you're going to use for your direct forecast might start to dwindle off over a certain period of time. Maybe you only have those inputs to forecast accurately over a 6 to 10 to 12 week period, but you want to build out a true 26-week cash flow forecast or even a 52-week cash flow forecast. That's when we'll see organizations also mix in the indirect part of the methodology as well, to be able to use the financial statements and certain working capital metrics and things like that to derive cash from, like a projected P&L statement, for example. So both have their place, and both really have their place together as well. And then monitor external factors too. So this is important, particularly now. Things are changing quickly, so you don't want to be forecasting out your interest expense, your revolver interest expense, based on a rate that's not accurate now if interest rates have increased. Likewise, you don't want to be, forecasting out your foreign currency cash flows based on an outdated exchange rate if that's changed meaningfully too, right? Those things can really impact the forecast, particularly when you're in the market environment that we're in today. Then number 7 here, we're almost there at the end of the top 10 tips here. So consider multi-forecast scenarios. This one we hit already. Definitely do a couple different scenarios. A cash forecast is an impression of how cash is going to move within your company. It's not set in stone. So having a couple different cuts of that forecast to consider a pessimistic scenario, an optimistic scenario, or anything that's sort of company specific is definitely worthwhile to do, just because it makes you more prepared to deal with those events when they come up. Routinely perform variance analysis, which is being done quite well, it seems like, by this group, but we've sort of highlighted the importance of that to be able to isolate out variance analysis caused by forecasting error versus variance analysis caused by business performance, and how you can kind of address each one of those differently depending on sort of the implications there. Lean on consultants and third parties, experts to effectively apply technology. So if you're purchasing technology, you're probably going to have a pretty sophisticated cash flow tool that maybe is a lot different than what you'd used previously to kind of drive your forecast, and you definitely want to make sure you're getting the most out of that. A lot of SaaS providers out there can consult to some extent on best practices for implementing their tool, but if you really have a sophisticated forecasting process or business model, it does help sometimes to bring in consultants as well that really understand best practices for forecasting for your industry, your business line. Particularly for global organizations, it helps a lot too to get everybody, like we said, on a consistent forecasting methodology, and really apply best practices across the board and get the most out of that tool. Like we mentioned before, really think about the objectives for that forecast, not just the technology itself. And to be able to deliver on those objectives, sometimes it does help to have that third-party assistance. And then 10 is just the sort of continuing sort of theme here of continuous improvement, really thinking about, is your forecast process still suitable for your organization? Is there anything that could be refined in that? Have new technologies been released either by your own software provider or through a different solution that might be a big benefit to your organization? And just making sure what you're doing is still suitable for the outcomes you're sort of driving at through your forecasting process from a very, very high level.
All right, John, let me head and hop in here. Let me go ahead and give you a little breather here. I'm going to go ahead before we dive into exactly what leading technology looks like, really looking at some of the tips that John really talked about. How is that coming into fruition through technology? So let me go ahead and launch the poll. We're asking you to share with you where you're at in terms of if you'd considered, automating cash forecasting process. Maybe you're in the discovery phase. You are. You're currently evaluating automation solutions. You didn't know it was possible, or you don't know. Of course, if you don't know, that's going to be your homework, because I think we've already started to see the tremendous value that cash forecasting improvement can mention. I really want to touch on, I haven't done a good job of this, is sometimes when we look at the improvement of cash forecasting, obviously it's extremely important, of the things that we talked about, improving accuracy, understanding why things are happening so we can take more control of that, but also just the efficiencies, the inherent productivity drag that ineffective processes to generate cash forecasts really put on a company. As we saw at the very beginning, 60% of folks, that's one of their top 3 things where they spend time. So I think there's a productivity drag that can really be addressed there, in addition to the other benefits, which we'll talk about later, how to look at those as well. So let me go ahead, close the polling question here, give you guys a couple more seconds, then we'll take a quick peek at the results, and then we'll really get into take a look at what technology, best-in-class technology looks like. It's pretty exciting, especially for me to see, given the way that we used to do cash forecasting in the only Excel world. So let me go ahead and close that. Let me go ahead and share the results. So good, there's 30% of you that are starting the discovery phase, which is good to see. 12% didn't know what's possible. 19%, those of you, you should find that out and you should ask why not. And so again, I think we see folks are really, again, John and I talked about on the webinar, cash forecasting is certainly on everyone's radar. And so our job is to educate the folks on what the value, right, of cash forecasting done right looks like. How do we make the business case? How do we overcome the objectives? And how do we, again, I like the first slide, how do we make sure that cash forecasting is not how treasury is measured, like our accuracy? It should be, right, the control of cash, the efficiency of cash movements, and things of that nature, and not just if we can produce a forecast and what does that do for us in terms of having a more accurate cash forecast, which is important. But I see that as an indirect impact to the bottom line. So let's go ahead and hide the polling question. Thank you so much, everyone, for answering. And then, John, I'll hand the floor back to you for a few minutes, and then I'll take us through the ROI forecasting accuracy and give us some closing thoughts.
Yep, that makes sense, Ernie. Yeah, and I'll move quick through these last couple slides here just to
Yeah,
give you to talk
yeah,
about the ROI. But this is a nice just sort of 8-step process slide for how to sort of create your forecast. This is kind of the methodology that we use too at TIS, where it's really tying cash flows to sources, right? Identifying the working capital drivers, the assumptions you're going to layer on top of those sources, identifying your time frame, your time horizon for your forecast. Are you looking to sort of manage cash in the short term or plan for longer term liquidity events and things like that? And then identify the sources per time horizon. Like I mentioned, you might have to mix and match sort of direct and indirect methodologies to be able to achieve what you're looking to do from that respect. Integrate those data flows, which is the big time saver, right? So bringing all that data together in an automated way to be able to feed it in and increase the speed to create a forecast and hopefully the frequency as well that organizations can forecast. And then further sort of refine those cash forecast logics and assumptions. And as you get to the more sophisticated end of the thing, really apply machine learning and algorithms to improve the forecast and create multiple different scenarios, right? So it kind of brings you all the way to that sort of really sophisticated end of the forecast. Maybe the thing to keep in mind, I know there's a lot of chatter about forecast technologies out there, and if you're doing like a basic 2-week cash forecast in Excel today based on like historical averages, and you're looking to implement technology, you don't necessarily need to jump to that 26-week, granular data AI-driven forecast. There's steps you can take along the way, and that's really what these next couple slides are meant to say. So, if you think about, we call this a walk approach, where you're sort of just focusing on automating the data flows for your bank data, which is great, right? Bringing that in, characterizing those receipts, learning more about the business, and just understanding the different sort of receipts buckets and then what that trending looks like over time. And then maybe just bringing in a lot of the forecast data that you have manually to be able to derive a short range forecast. You can get to sort of a run approach where you're still focusing really on the short term. You're using your forecast more for day-to-day cash management purposes, but you're getting a lot more sophisticated about the inputs from that respect for the short range forecast, and maybe even deriving that from invoice level AR AP data, system data, just in general data that better reflects what's going to drive that cash flow from a business perspective, and sort of increases the accuracy as well as the level of variance analysis that you can really do. And then you move all the way to the run forecast, and that's when you're really starting to mix and match direct and indirect methodologies on the next slide here to get past that sort of 4 to 6 to 10 week period all the way up to 12 months, right? Even using your forecasted P&L and certain working capital assumptions to be able to project out cash all the way to 12 months. Really use it at that point for more strategic purposes, liquidity planning, or helping the executive team plan for certain key cash events. Layering on AI and machine learning and all those different things that you can do to sort of better refine the scenario analysis, the forecast sophistication, and overall the variance analysis. And you can kind of progress along the way, right? You don't have to jump to the fly. You can start with a walk approach, and there's value in that because it automates a portion of the process for you. It helps you learn about the business, helps you kind of identify what you want to use for forecast methodologies on a go-forward basis, and then continue to advance to run, to fly, to make that more and more sophisticated over time, right? But it increases the time to value from a software investment as well, where you immediately better cash managers, from being able to use an automated solution, and then puts you on the track to really, have a sophisticated sort of best-in-class forecasting process as you sort of reach fruition here.
All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate you doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us here today. So I think I just want to make a comment here. This slide to me is tremendously valuable. I think it really shows. So sometimes, like John said, it's a progression, right? So it's almost like they have all these maturity models, right? So I like the walk, run, fly, but then I like how you're able to see what the additional value is, right? From moving from one step to the next. And before I talk about giving you a little framework to do the value of increasing that accuracy. John, I want to just kind of ask you, from a perspective on what you're seeing in the market in terms of cash forecasting. A couple questions. One, are you seeing kind of two? Are you seeing more interest, and what are the questions? That would be part one. And part two is, where are companies that in your mind seeing the most value in investing in improving cash forecasting with technology?
Mm. Yeah, I'd say part one, we're definitely seeing more interest. It definitely seems to be the
Yeah,
topic, even, normal day-to-day conversations, but, visiting some of these trade shows and conferences and things that people want to talk about quite a bit. And I think you see it too in that survey results slide we have, where it was,
yeah,
somewhere around 70-80% were kind of evaluating a solution. It's definitely top of mind. People are thinking about economic uncertainty. They're thinking about, maximizing idle cash, reducing borrowing costs, increasing, what they can make for interest revenue and things like that. Just being better cash managers. And I think that given that how things are sort of evolving from a market perspective, it's also an easy thing for Treasury to make the business case for, which is nice. And I know you're going to get into that on the ROI
yeah,
slide as well here, but I mean, there's a real concrete business case for better managing cash, obviously, right? Being a better business partner and making sure that you're sort of on top of a lot of these variables we've discussed here today. So I think that's really driving it quite a bit. The market, in terms of what they're interested in, they're interested in creating the forecast more frequently, for sure. Real-time cash management, the simplification of the data aggregation and the standardization of that data that they need to build that forecast. Those are all the things that they're looking to, I think, really solve for today. And I think the market's also very, very curious about what kind of role AI and machine learning can play in the forecasting process too, and how that can kind of help
yeah.
them, get deeper levels of insights that aren't available sort of on the surface level to the typical user.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm not trying to force feed the answer, but I just, in my mind, to me, just given my experience and what I've seen, conversations I've had with folks, and you can say whether you find this as well, I find people that are surprised, most surprised on some front about how much time that they're saving, right, by getting automation in there, and then what visibility gives them insights into problems that they didn't know existed, so they weren't necessarily expecting those out of the gate.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I think that was almost like the shift that you saw around that 2019, 2020 period,
Yeah,
where the forecast was just this report people created, right? So if it took a week or two to create the forecast, it wasn't a big deal. But now it's this thing that's, expected to really analyze and use to manage cash, and there's all these questions coming from the CFO, and for that purpose, it's a lot more important to reduce that time that you're spending creating the forecast and spend more time on actually analyzing it and, sort of being better cash managers. So yeah, I'd agree completely.
yeah. So just real quick, just because I haven't seen this enough, just to give you the value of automation. John mentioned the ability to make the business case. So again, if you'd like a copy of the slides, please let me know. I'm happy to share those with you. But just kind of real high level, you got your net benefit, your savings, your gross benefit, right, generated from automation, and that can be the time saved, productivity impacts, and then the accuracy improvements, right, minus your additional OpEx for subscribing to your software, and then any expenses that you might need related to implementing the technology as well. And here's where I think we don't really get enough here is, John talked about what are the better use of cash, right? Savings, interest income. We have interest income. We're not borrowing, interest expense, FX losses. So make sure you're looking at all those buckets there. So if we would have had this data instead of this, we would have done this, we would have done that. And then what's the value to us? What's our cost of borrowing? What would we have done in terms of our FX? What would we have done in terms of our interest rate? maybe it has consequences for covenant, which may be a drag on our M&A activity. So just to get you set in that mindset. So just, a little higher level forecasting reduces our variance, right? Investments for the correct amounts. Again, I'm just giving you more detail there. FX trades, reduce bank balances. What does this mean? More income, lower FX losses, interest rate. So again, we're going to give it to you one more time. I'm not going to read these out. I just like to make sure that I'm saying things more than once, right? To give you a little bit of spin, we need to know our goals. We need to understand the data. We need to collaborate. We need to understand our drivers. And we need to manage the drivers, and we need to invest in technology and the right solution partner. I'm going to go ahead and launch our final polling question. I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering the polling question. Again, if you are interested in receiving CTP credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer the final polling question and the short survey after the webinar is over. I want to, of course, thank my co-speaker, John, for speaking with me today and doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So, John, thank you so much for your time and insights. I always appreciate it.
Yep, no problem at all, Ernie. Really enjoyed being here as always.
Thank you. And then I also want to thank my webinar partner today, TIS. They share my commitment to thought leadership. They have some amazing resources on their websites. They also have some amazing webinars other than what I do with them. I think they have another webinar yet this week. Hopefully you've experienced a couple of their other webinars during their summer sizzling webinar days. They have some great content there. So let me go ahead and give you guys a little warning before I close the polling question. Please go ahead and click your answer. I'll give you another few seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much. And then I also want to share with you that I'm excited to have TIS as a partner. Cash management demo days on September 14th. We're going to have a day full of demos, 3 AP, 3 AR, and 3 Treasury. So it's really a good way and efficient way for you to make sure you're on top of your game in terms of your technology related to managing cash. We're going to ask you if you'd like us to go ahead and register you for that free conference here in the webinar survey as well. Really appreciate your support of that event. And finally, to everyone, I appreciate each and every one of you. Enjoy your summer and make the rest of your day great, everyone.